Before we get started on the next step, I just kind of want to step back and review where we're at. Remember, we copied down from the top our image processing, and we modified our surface array. So we came up with this idea of a coordinate system, which we can use to create our rectangular panels. So we needed to modify that a bit. So we're going to feed that brightness criteria that comes off of our image processing into a kind of a logic system. So we're going to use a less than or greater than symbol. We're going to feed that brightness in, and then we're going to make a determination if it's greater or less than a certain number, and that number is just arbitrary. We know that it needs to be, if we looked at these brightness values, they run from 0 to 1. So if we picked a midpoint, 0, so a midpoint could be, or a little slightly lower, is 0.4. This is an arbitrary number. It can be anything you want it to be. It'll just change the mix of clear to solid panels. So we're feeding that into a logic. If it's less than that number, it'll make a Boolean output, and that'll either be true or false. It means it's above or it is either true that it is less than that number. So if we were to look at that list, we get a bunch of false, and then let me pin it here. And then where it meets the logic, the number is less than, it'll make a true statement out of it. And so we're feeding that in. Let me unpin this again. I'm trying to unpin it. There we go. We're feeding it into an if-then statement. So if this true and false test, if it's true, it passes a value. If it's false, it passes another value. And so the one value we want to pass is, if it's false, we can pass, and you can write this logic either way. All you need to do is make sure that the logic is consistently opposite, whether you want to make glass or a solid panel based on those value systems. So, but if it's true, in this case, we're going to pass through a 0, and I make a list of repeated items because we're going to need to have 1,024 items, because we have 1,024 values over here. And I'll show you where to get the list, this idea of creating the list of repeated items. So it'll pass through that logic system, and output then will be either values that we want to pass through that are above 4, or pass 0 if it's below 4. And so we're going to then just duplicate the same thing for our glass selection. So let's go ahead. I'm going to just actually, I'm going to move this off here a little bit and kind of disconnect it. So we'll have it as a reference, but I'll pull the wires off of it. And we'll use this and go ahead and just recreate the same thing. So the first thing I'm going to look for is that logic. Let me just close off my search here. Go to math, we'll go to logic, operators. And we're going to look for a less than symbol. So there's our Boolean less than signal, or node. And so right away we can go ahead and start doing some connections here. So we want to take that integer, that value, and then you want to create this number value. In this case, I made it so right-click number. And then input that 4 value into it, or whatever value you want. And that then will, if we run it, we will get our, oops. Sorry, I always have a hard time getting this list to open up properly. There it is. Oops. It's a little bit sensitive here. There we go. So we have our falses and or, I got to pin it. I know this gets painful for you. Let me do that and pin it. And you see we have our falses and our true values here. Okay, so we want to just really feed that then right into that if-then statement. So let's look for where that if-then logic statement would be. And it turns out to be a little bit hard to find here. List. I'm not going to find it quickly, and I'm kind of wasting your time here with my fuddling. So I'll just type in if into the, or try to. Let's do that again. I don't know why I'm not getting a good keyboard input. if, got it finally working. So it just will pop up at the top. So once again, we have that idea that we're going to put the Boolean logic, the true and false. That's the test. And if it's true, we want to pass through a 0. So I could put in a number. And we'll leave that at 0. And I'm going to copy that and paste that because we need a number, another number, and we need that 1024. And then we need that idea of a list of repeated items. So let's see if we can find that. List of repeated items under generate. That one I found quickly. And we'll feed in the item that we want to pass through and then the amount of times we want to pass through it. And if we go ahead and run that, we'll get a list of, and I'm doing this to show you, but also to confirm. So we get that list of 1,024 items. So now we're ready to feed that in. So we want to pass that through. If it's a true value, and like I said, it could be vice versa if it was if you wanted to pass it through as a false value. And then the idea here is that if we first we did the check for that to get true and false, but now we still have those values and we can pass those through if they are what we consider false. And so I'll go ahead and run that again. And this is where we come up with a bit of a problem. We come up with 1,000 or 10,000 items. And that's because the list is trying to go through it a few times. It has a little bit to do with the way I flattened some of the previous list. So I'm going to go to lacing, and I'm going to set this for shortest, a critical function that we must do. And I think that's going to rerun that. And then, no, it did not rerun it. So I'm going to go manually rerun it. And now we have a list of 1024. So that's this list of solid panel selection. And let me go ahead and delete this one. This was the reference one I made. And now we're really set up to, I'm going to grab these and group them. Right click, create a group. And we'll call this solid panel selection. And I'll do a copy and paste. We'll move this down. And I'm going to do, first of all, change its color so it's distinctively different. And then I will rename this. We'll call this glass panel selection. And we're going to separate out, we're going to change out our Boolean operator. So I'm going to go to math, operators, and I was using a less than, so I'm going to look for a greater than. And now it's just a matter of rewiring it. So I'm going to plug in the X. The value we want to pass through is from the list. Let me pull, it's getting a little bit crowded in here. And then we want to pull that Boolean logic through to the test here. And now that I've done the rewiring of that, I can just hit delete. And now just a review, that is exactly, it's just making an exactly opposite selection of the criteria. And so the last thing I want to do is I'm going to create a watch box so we can look at this data. And I'll create two watch boxes and I'll make them side by side. And we'll go ahead and feed in the two value systems. So we can look at what the differences will be with these. And I'll hit run. And so let me zoom in here. And so you can see where we have values that are above 4, we get a solid panel. Where we have values that are below, we're going to get 0. So we can now start to segment out what we want to make glass and or solid. And if I scroll down here, just to check on things. You can see here at 83, it's got a value, then it switches to 84. So where the logic flips over, then we start to get values in the other direction for the other panel. So we're all set now with being able to make a determination based on that value of 4 that we set up to make a panel solid or a panel clear. And now all we have to do is build the panels, and we'll do that in the next bit.